That tells us one piece of evidence. And I think the key thing to note here, if you look at 7, which is the most of these conventions signed, is there's a wide range of countries of income levels. It isn't just, the US and Singapore are the weirdos. We don't sign very many standards because we don't have to, we're such great guys. And I have no idea why Singapore doesn't, but they may have a similar attitude to us. We also don't sign some of these standards, as you may know. We've had troubles with the ILO when the communist trade unions were treated as real trade unions. The AFL-CIO had problems, and so we've been a very uneasy thing. I give the correlations here, and if you include the US, the correlation with income is 0.09, which is pretty modest, but there is a positive correlation. And if you leave us and Singapore out, it's 0.22. There is, I mean, the higher income countries tend to do more, but the fact is everybody has something, including low income countries. Now, one of the claims against standards was that they would reduce the speed of economic development. So it really was going to hurt me if India or China, have better standards, because it's going to force me to raise the cost of production, the multinationals will go elsewhere, my products will be higher priced. And we do know of companies that will say, wages in Bangladesh are a lot lower than in China. And they'll say, I'm moving to Bangladesh, et cetera. But in fact, there's been a whole bunch of academic studies. They find no relation, on average, between these core labor standards, as CLS there, and comparative advantage. There's not even any evidence that the countries that get more investment from the West grow faster or slower. Countries that actually do a lot of their savings themselves do very well without our putting investment in. And then there are reasons to think that some of these standards actually improve economic growth. The children to school, the reduced gender discrimination. If you have less discrimination, you open the doors for another half of your workforce to produce productively. Then I decided the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, which is the sort of World Bank for the Latin America, they both concluded, even if they go to freedom of association and have unions, there's no evidence that this harms anything. I did some regressions. I don't think I give my regressions here. I think this is enough to maybe I do. We'll see in the next slide, do I? No, I don't. I didn't think I did. But I took some measures and just said, well, is there any evidence that across lots of countries that labor standards are negatively correlated with growth? No, there isn't. But there is evidence that a whole lot of other things that conservative economists like are indeed positively correlated with growth. You don't want to have a lot of inflation. I think Zimbabwe is heading to the basket case. You do want to have free markets. Yes, the more freer your markets are. You do want to be involved in the global system in some fashion or other. All of the, you take an index of all those things, they are positively correlated with growth. But labor issues turn out not to be. The reason is, I think, because what labor does is largely shift some of the returns from capitalism to workers. It doesn't harm the productivity of capitalism. And I believe that was the view of Harry Bridges, in whom this thing is named. Yeah, and ultimately you're shooting the workers and yourself in the foot if you're doing anything that really reduces productivity and reduces maybe some short-run gains, but in the long run, you don't want to do that. You want the system to be as productive as humanly possible. You just want to make sure you get a fair share. And that's largely what unions and these labor laws are meant to do. They're not meant to reduce productivity, and be inefficient. And the regressions seem to show that. So I think the big problem is implementing standards. You have them. Almost all these countries have signed up to them. Many companies have given their corporate standards. And I just said, fighting greed and corruption is hard. Well, there's money to be made by cheating. I already told you the labor ministries are poorly funded. One of the more weakly enforced countries in the world is our own. We have very few people And the current Department of Labor probably is the weakest it's ever been in the history, since you go back, I don't know, till when. There's never been a more irrelevant labor industry. If you actually do counts of how many people they have trying to enforce minimum wage laws or whatever it is, it's just tiny numbers you come up with. I haven't looked at numbers of late. But when I did look, they were small, and that was under, maybe 10 years ago. They're going to be smaller today. A lot of governments in the third world fear independent unions. And they fear them because of what? Because the unions actually will help bring about a more free market and open system. Solidarnosc, the one thing the Chinese fear, they don't want a free trade unions. They have a phobia about Solidarnosc. That somehow or other, if they have free unions, those unions are going to turn out the communist dictatorship and create a free market, and a free democratic country. Companies fear independent monitors for some of the same reasons. You don't want these things. And then probably the most serious thing, though, is cheating is pretty easy. And any stories you have about how monitoring things, you monitor the factory one day, the next day things go back to what they were before they knew you were going to monitor them, you were going to come in. I've been to factories, of U.S. factories, where the cheating was kind of sensible in one sense. That's what it was explained to me by the union, this is UAW and General Motors. So these are reputable guys. So the company has certain standards about what they're doing. And then I'd go to the factory and I would look around and I'd say, well, gee, all the men are segregated in one area and all the women are in other areas. And I thought that was one of the company things they were not supposed to do. And the factory manager, the union leader said, look, the guys want to talk about sports and the ladies don't want to talk about that. And we find it's more productive if we just let them be separate. And of course they said when somebody comes from central headquarters or from EEOC, we tell them to mix up. And you just say, okay, that's, but there I think the quote cheating is not harmful, but it could be cheating that is harmful, that is also easy to do. And so I put down here, sometimes non-enforcement can be optimal. Maybe it's just in everybody's interest we ignore these rules. I'm sure this university has many silly rules that everybody ignores whenever they can. It's just, you have to make some decisions about that. Now I want to tell you about one standard that I was stunned at to find out how well it is enforced in developing countries, and therefore represents something when you think about the cash standards, it's potentially enforceable through pressure from us as well. This is minimum wages. I must say I believed that the minimum wages were largely not enforced in developing countries. And I think but I would say this at various meetings, the World Bank, all places, and nobody would really complain. I would say, well, mostly they're enforced against the big multinationals, but when you get into your informal sector and so on, not enforced. Then there came a series of studies in the last, I'd say 5-6 years from the World Bank in large part, which show, a spike means that a lot of the people are being paid right about the minimum wage. And so we see some data in the formal sector, which you'd believe, okay, that means they're enforced in the formal sector. And you have before and after. So you see, what was the minimum wage in 1995? They changed the minimum wage to 1998, and we'd see the spike of the distribution move. So there'd be a big, bunch of people at the minimum wage. And that seems pretty clear, in the formal sector. The shock was finding that in the informal sector, where the law does not apply, the same spike would occur, and it would move just as much. I mean, to me, that's mind-boggling. And then I first saw this in a thesis of a woman in Britain, UCL, University College London, and I must admit, her thesis passed, and she gotten a good job and so on, but I didn't sell the work as the way I should have, because I was vaguely suspicious. I said, this just sounds a little odd. And now, speaking negatively of myself on this, now that the World Bank has had about 6 or 7 studies, I now feel, yes, she was right. And so